And we're live. Welcome to LOOPcast. The great paternity leave tour of Pogo continues. We have a great guest today. Welcome Steve Cortes to the show. I'm going to let Josh Mercer introduce you in as far as in the way that you deserve. I'm going to let him do that in just a minute. First, a couple of housekeeping things. Yes, all of you who were asking, where are you on Wednesday? Mercer and I, we took a day off in the tradition of Pogo, and we were blessed to be able to join together with other Catholic Vote staff members, and it was a great time together. So thank you
We got
for
a plan for the upcoming year,
giving us
people. Lock and load. Come on, man.
exactly. Sometimes greatness requires a little bit of rest and recovery and planning. First of all, just we continue to pray for our Holy Father, the Pope. He is still in hospital. The reports coming out of Rome is that there are some improvements, but of course, double pneumonia at the age of 88 is not a laughing matter. So please continue to join us in prayer for our Holy Father. Great way. We don't have an ad today, so I want to talk about Champions Club. You want to support Loopcast, and the best way to do that is to join our Champions Club. We're going to throw that in the chat. These are our monthly donors who help us really keep the lights on, help us to plan in a way that we have a planned budget. And as you know, you can always do more with a planned budget, as DOGE is revealing to us rapidly. So, and Mercer, you've got some merch on today. We have this is new merch.
I mean, I got to say that everyone's kind of busy, and I think you go through life and you think, how many books, you want to read. I mean, I get a chance to crack open a few books, but I know so many of us are so busy with our lives and kids and everything going on, and sometimes it can be hard to try to, I need to learn more about church history, or I need to learn more about political thought or whatever. And so I saw that email in the Loop a few weeks ago about from Christendom College. They have this new series called Principles. You can just go Google Christendom College Principles. They're free online lectures. You can listen to it, you can watch it, or you can listen to it while you're doing an exercise or something like that. And I just thought this would be a great way to learn a little bit more about the faith, learn a little bit more church history. And so I would just, encourage our audience. Hey, I signed up, I dug into it. I think you'll get a lot out of it. So just go to Christendom College's website or Google Christendom College, and it's called Principles, these free classes. So shout out to a good school in Virginia there. They're doing a great job. So I wanted to give them a shout out.
Yeah, Christendom, one of the OG like Catholic revival renaissance of education colleges. So definitely check out Christendom College. And hey, I love the hoodie, Josh. It's a dress down Friday kind of thing. But speaking of dress down Friday or not, we have Steve Cortes with us, looking sharp. Mercer, I'm going to let you introduce the guy.
I mean,
the man, the myth, the legend. Let's do it.
I joked with Steve, I'm going to intentionally dress down because he always looks so dapper. I mean, come on, it's like let me decrease so you may increase, right, Steve? So we're excited. Catholic Vote is excited to bring on Steve Cortes as senior political advisor. Steve, you probably do recognize Steve from TV. He's done thousands of TV hits from CNBC to CNN. In fact, he was so successful at CNN that they kept paying him, but they got him off the air because he knew he was too effective.
And of course, shut up.
I think one of the best things that Steve ever did was that wonderful video smashing that whole hoax about Charlottesville, the Fine People hoax, that the media tried to make it seem like Donald Trump was equating people who were like neo-Nazis with people. And this was a garbage thing. And you put together that great 5-minute video with PragerU. I've shared that so many times with so many people, so many liberals in my family. Like, oh, dude, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, if you want to attack Trump for X, Y, or Z, fine, but not this Fine People hoax. And Steve was so great with that. Steve also worked in the first Trump White House. He helped out with the campaign. And one of the things I actually like about it, I think I'd like you to tell our listeners about this, was how you were so instrumental in helping J.D. Vance. You may know who he is. We're watching him just barbecue the press. We're watching him destroy people on Twitter. I'm like, this is the best vice president we've had since like Nixon in the 50s. I love this guy. You were there. You were an early supporter, just like Catholic Vote, by the way, but you were an early supporter of J.D. Vance when he first decided he was going to throw his hat in the ring and run for Senate back in 2022. I'd like you to introduce, tell people about that. I think that was just so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, too, if I could just get a quick prayer request in. You mentioned PragerU. Dennis Prager is a dear friend of mine. A lot of folks out there probably listen to him and probably know that he had a very serious fall. Has been hospitalized for a long time. He's not a young man. So please keep him on your prayer list as well. He's a wonderful soul, a great American. He does not share our faith, but he has unbelievable respect for the Catholic Church and for faithful Catholics in this country. And he and I often talk, whether it's on air or privately, really significant philosophical, theological matters. And somebody else, by the way, who I discuss all that with is JD Vance. And that's a good introduction into my my work with him. I first became aware of him because of his book, Hillbilly Elegy, which of course made quite a splash at the time. And so I read it and got a hold of him and said, "Hey, you're clearly going to be running for office." He said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Yes, you are." And I said, "And when you do, I want to help you because I've been helping Donald Trump and I know what I'm doing in this area." And his book so gripped me. It's the only book I've ever read that actually brought me to tears. It was that moving, I thought.
Wow.
The trials that he had to go through as a child, things that no child should have to endure, but he did, he and his sister. But the love that persevered through it, his ability to find a way toward professional success and eventually find his way toward our church in much more recent years. All of it was just so profoundly moving and impressive to me. That I said, when you run, I want to help. And so I stayed true to that pledge. And in 2022, when he entered the Republican primary in his home state of Ohio, I went to work for him. And it seems like ancient history now. Of course, it was just a few years ago, right?
So much has happened.
Yeah, this rise has been so meteoric. And by the way, that was a tough race. That also seems almost unfathomable now, right? That because he's such a popular figure, especially among conservatives, among Republicans on the political right in this country, and even more broadly than that, I think getting to be very popular just to the general public. But he had a really tough race. That 2022 primary in Ohio, because Ohio had become such a red state, that the main race was the primary rather than the general election because of the way Trump transformed Ohio, which used to be, an absolute bellwether swing state. Now we can pretty reliably count on it as being a red state. But because of that, then you get a big crowded primary with a lot of quality candidates, people who had already held significant elected offices in Ohio, people who had a lot more campaign money behind them and name recognition, most of them, at least in Ohio, than J.D. Vance did. So we had an uphill battle. When I first joined him, we were in fourth place in the polling. But I figured that the more that people saw and heard from J.D. Vance of Ohio, they were going to rally to him. And that certainly was the case. But it was really grassroots campaigning at first. So we just drove all over the state. And I was sort of the opening act. So I would introduce him. A lot of Republican voters knew me because of all my work for Trump and because of all of my many TV appearances. So I was a face that they were maybe at that time more familiar with than JD. But so I would be the opening act, introduce him, say why I so admired this man, because of his Marine service, his business success, his principles, his ethics, amazing father, husband, someone who loves Ohio, who cares so deeply about working class people all over this country, but especially in some of the forgotten places like the former steel towns of Eastern Ohio. I would make that introduction, then, and then let him shine before people. And sure enough, slowly but steadily climbed those polls, got the attention of President Trump, got the endorsement of President Trump, which I went down to Mar-a-Lago to seek from him.
Nice.
I'm not going to say it was all because of me, but I was at least part.
Didn't hurt.
That happened. And that really sealed the deal. By the way, still, it's not like JD ran away with it, even with that endorsement, though. Again, this was a really competitive primary, but he did win that primary. And then the general election, of course, became an incredible senator. And I'm just so incredibly glad that he is the vice president of the United States. And I'm proud for the small role that I was able to play in that, but have a great relationship. And I can tell you this, too, from riding around the state, doing, as I said, kind of those retail politics, we would go anywhere that we could find a crowd, and it didn't have to be a big crowd. We'd go to an old folks home if there were 12 people having a coffee, that was enough. If we'd go to a diner, we thought we could grab 20 people who would give us a listen. And then obviously a lot of larger staged events as well, but everything in between. But when you ride around the state almost in a circle again and again, you really get to know somebody, right? And all of that downtime. And we talked about, both matters, profound as well as silly and mundane. I grew to just admire and respect him even more, and a real friendship developed. And a lot of those conversations revolved around faith. And he is, of course, a very faithful Catholic, new Catholic, and speaks with the zeal of a convert. but somebody with a depth of knowledge about the faith, where you would seemingly think he was a cradle Catholic, and somebody who had studied theology his whole life. But that's also just the kind of brain he had. So, and even outside of his principles, which of course are the most important thing, but outside of his principles, I can tell you that this is a guy, in terms of his brain and his recall, he has a computer-like brain. I mean, he really does. His grasp
Yeah,
of
it's astonishing.
and statistics and facts, and his ability to speak off the cuff without notes, and accurately cite data and statistics. I'm not sure I've seen anyone else in politics who has those kinds of talents and abilities to the degree he does. So it's one of the reasons that I was willing to work really, really hard for him, and absolutely thrilled that Donald Trump selected him as his running mate, and even more thrilled that he's vice president. And by the way, probably in this audience, because people are probably very politically attuned, you probably saw him at CPAC over the weekend. I thought it was just an incredible interview, and not just on sort of things we regard as traditionally politics. Of course, he did talk about those, but also talked about things like, what does masculinity mean, and what should men be aspiring to? Of course, gave almost a mini sermon about the faith, right?
Right. What is Christianity?
Yes. Who is Christ?
Brilliant.
What does it mean to our lives? And I can promise you this is not a guy who is going to compartmentalize his faith. He's not going to say that's for Sunday, or that's for prayer time before meals. No,
or I'm personally opposed, but
right. No, it infuses everything he does, right? And that's
no Cuomo.
What Christ demands of us. So,
and I think we're definitely going to get into that CPAC appearance a little bit and talk more about sort of the cultural, what's going on in the conservative movement there. I did want to start and just back up a little bit, talking about, we just hit the 1 month Trump moment. So we've had 1 month of Donald Trump in office, and it has been breakneck speed. We've got confirmations left and right. Almost the whole cabinet's confirmed. We're just waiting on education and labor now, I think.
It's actually fast. It's a faster pace than Obama 09.
Right. This is historic, and I'm not being just a podcast host and being, this is historic speed. The DOGE website. Can we just pull up the DOGE website link there that I have, Simon? Because they're just going to town. If you want to just dig into, and the transparency here is also astonishing given what we experienced the last 4 years. DOGE is claiming they've already saved $55 billion. Of course, their goal is $1 trillion, so they've got a ways to go. But hey, I'll take $55 billion. You can do a lot with that money. And go ahead.
Interestingly enough, too, like I was going to save it for my Twilight Zone, but well, I'll just use it now. I mean, what they're thinking about doing, Musk and Trump are like, well, let's just do some DOGE checks. And so their thought was, with this savings, they would give like 20% of the savings back to the taxpayer in like a $5,000 DOGE check. Okay.
Right.
And then another 20% their thought would be to actually pay down some debt, because we have a massive national debt and we got to start doing something on that. Right.
Very dangerous.
And then the other 60%, they would actually put it into the next year's budget so that you can actually make the budget smaller because you've used less spending. Because in Washington, they don't want to solve problems. They want a bigger budget next year. That's the only thing they ever care about. And so if you can actually put the money into the next year's budget, then we didn't use as much this year, right? And therefore, the next year's budget and the next year's budget, you can actually get smaller and smaller budgets. So I applaud what they're trying to do. Overall, just save the taxpayer lots of money. And then, I wouldn't mind a DOGE check. I ain't gonna lie to you.
Yeah, and a lot of people are applauding, right, Steve? Because I know you sent me, your organization has done some polling.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
What have you found?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to. So we do extensive polling, and by the way, for a long time I've done within this polling. We ask faith, we ask religious affiliation. So we often have crosstabs that are pretty important, and I'm happy to talk about sort of the Catholic crosstabs in my latest poll, because we polled the state of Wisconsin, which is a very Catholic state. The reason we polled Wisconsin, just because previous to that, going back a little bit, during election time, we only polled battleground states, and we just did them basically on a rotational basis. Once the election was over, we then switched to national polling because we're not in election mode then post-November, so we switched to national polling. Now I've gone back to a state poll. Why? Well, because of that April 1st Supreme Court race for the state Supreme Court. of Wisconsin, which is elected and which is closely divided 4-3, could potentially flip to a conservative. They're technically nonpartisan races, but to a conservative majority on that court, which could be really important, not just for Wisconsin, but for the whole country.
Absolutely. And just real quick, just make sure our listeners know, Steve's coming on to help us as a senior political advisor for Catholic Vote. He has this other organization he does such great work with. That's called, if I remember correctly, the League of American Workers.
Yes, exactly. Yes, thank you. And yes, and by the way, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joining Catholic Vote. Thank you for the honor and the opportunity to the entire team there. And of course, to Brian Birch, who has done such a magnificent job and will continue to do incredible work for this entire country over at the Vatican once he gets confirmed. But it's an honor to work for this organization because it's one of the most effective advocacy organizations in America, and one that is certainly near and dear to my heart. So, but getting back to the polling, what we found in Wisconsin, and this was a poll, by the way. We do our polling, obviously I have a bias, okay, but I don't poll with a bias. We do our polling in a really rigorous scientific way. So for example, in this Wisconsin poll, our sample universe of their 2024 vote, their vote from this last November, was Trump +1. It was 50 to 49, which is exactly where the vote was.
Nailed it.
So we're very careful about that. I mean, we make sure we use real pollsters. We use TIPP, which did the polling for Investors Business Daily for many, many years, which was really widely regarded and esteemed. Unfortunately, Investors Business Daily doesn't do much political polling anymore, but that's good for us because it means this pollster is available, and then we hire him, to do our polling. So what we found, though, to get to the numbers, and what we found is tremendous support for President Trump's agenda so far. And I put all this out in the public, we released the entire poll, so you can see all the crosstabs if you're curious. If you're a poll nerd like me and you want to dig in, if you'd rather me just tell you a couple highlights that are important. President Trump's approval rating is at +3, which is the highest he has ever had in the state of Wisconsin. And that's in extensive polling, both that we have done, as well as a lot of public polling that is out there. JD Vance, by the way, is at +4. To put that in context, Joe Biden left office in our poll in Wisconsin at -15 on approve, disapprove of his job performance. So, really, really significant. And to give you some Catholic numbers there, by the way. So among Catholics, Trump is +13 in Wisconsin. So
wow.
+3 overall among Catholics, +13. And interestingly, that almost exactly matches the Catholic vote in Wisconsin for Trump, according to exit polling, as well as other, I think, rigorous statistical analysis of the Catholic vote in Wisconsin. Trump was +13 as well in the vote, and so he was determinative in a state that was only won, or they were determinative, I should say, in a state that was only won by 29,000 votes. Wisconsin was the tightest of the swing states. It was the closest of the victories. We swept all 7 swing states, which is incredible, of course, but Wisconsin was a nail biter, and that Catholic margin was the difference. I mean, that absolutely was the difference in a state like Wisconsin. But for example, to get to some of the topics, when we asked about support for DOGE, we get +22%, and that's overall.
Wow, that's stunning.
Mass deportations +23%. Protecting girls' sports, his executive order, +43%.
Wow.
And to give you one more Catholic, and I can nerd out all day on the numbers, but to give you one more number, I don't want to overwhelm you too much. But on mass deportations, we can see that the laity in Wisconsin do not agree with the stance of the bishops right now. The Catholic population of Wisconsin, per our poll, in favor of mass deportations, +33%. So overall, this +23%, all Wisconsinites, Wisconsin Catholics, +33%, 64% in favor of mass deportations, 31% not in favor.
Even more than the general population of Wisconsin.
Significantly more.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting, considering all of the back and forth that we've seen between church leadership among and the Trump administration the last few weeks. That's stunning. Those are stunning.
And those
numbers.
DOGE numbers don't surprise me because, I think it was the New York Times. Maybe it was Politico or Axios, one of those 3 blogs. They did a poll of voters in.
You mean
Arizona.
USAID, right? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
they did a poll of swing voters in Arizona, and every last person was like, "Yeah, we like this whole DOGE thing." They're like, "Wait, what?" Yeah, no, we like it. These are all voters who had voted for Biden the first time, but then voted for Trump the second time, and to a person, they're like, "Yeah, no, we like this disruption."
Right.
Yep.
Media's
right.
like, "What? That's why the Democrats, they think, oh, we're going to keep hitting it and they keep hitting it. But it's interesting. The messages that would work on that 20 years ago might not, oh, how could you shut down this popular program? It's helping poor kids in,
Right.
Appalachia or in Zimbabwe. And then, oh gosh, you sound mean. But I think Americans are understanding, like, yeah, I mean, if you cut like a 1,000 programs, there might be 2 or 3 in there that, maybe I kind of liked it. But overall, I think they're happy that someone's turning the spigot off.
Right. And
Right.
I do think too, there's two aspects to that I think are super important. The first is that DOGE and the whole team, they've done a great job of highlighting the corruption of the spending, right? That so much of it was not at all about charity, not at all about aid to vulnerable people, either abroad or at home, but instead about we taxpayers, literally funding our political opponents, funding an entire leftist ecosystem, much of which is totally domestic, by the way, nothing to do with the United States helping the rest of the world. So I think that's the first aspect. But then the second also is just the macroeconomic backdrop. And just so folks know out there, they're not familiar with my work, I was a bond trader. So I traded interest rates and inflation for 25 years before I got into politics. Politics is a second career for me. I got into it with Donald Trump.
A good one.
Back in, thank you, but back in 2016. And so I switched careers as a middle-aged guy, essentially. Before that, I had an entire career trading bonds and interest rates. So that's part of why I founded League of American Workers, because the economy is my number one topic of hopefully expertise and concern. So I watch all this really closely. And when you look at the polling, the voting results, even just anecdotal information of talking to regular Americans, they are so frustrated with inflation, of what Bidenomics did to them, particularly with key elements like their mortgage, their rent, and their grocery store prices, that they are in no mood for excessive government spending. In other words, I'm saying that Biden, in a way, created the conditions, actually, for the DOGE to find broad support and to thrive, because people are so fed up with the prices they have to pay, where a regular trip to the grocery store for just staples, not luxury items, when that becomes a source of anxiety, people are a lot more willing to shine a harsh light on the government and say, wait a second, what are you spending this money on? Because I think folks, even if they're not economists, folks they intrinsically understand that when we spend like that, and when we create this debt that is unsustainable, it drives interest rates up, drives inflation up. So in other words, your expensive trip to the grocery store is directly related to what these charlatans are doing in Washington, D.C., spending money in your name that we don't have, that we have to borrow. And so given that, I think it's why we find really strong pro-DOGE polling right now. And I sure hope that continues.
Yeah, and it seems like the Democrats are starting to maybe pick up on this a little bit. We got some interesting words from Pete Buttigieg that we'll get into later in the show. But I did want to turn briefly, because I think it's something that's near and dear to the listeners' heart, being Catholic. I'm here for all the DOGE. I'm here for the JD Vance. I'm here for so much of what Trump is doing. We've just been like high-fiving a million angels because the W's are racking up. But there might have been a little bump in the bump this week. And of course, I'm talking about the executive order that dropped regarding in vitro fertilization. And so we got this order on Tuesday. So we weren't able to talk about it right away on Wednesday, which is actually good, because I think a little percolation and reflection was helpful here. He was in Mar-a-Lago. He signed 3 executive orders. The first one, and he trots out Steve Miller to talk about them. It was kind of interesting. Trump wasn't out there like rah, IVF, but he trots out Steve to kind of give the rundown. And this is a focus. This one was focused on expanding access to IVF for Americans. It calls for policy recommendations to make it easier for families to access IVF and, quote, aggressively reduce out-of-pocket and health plan costs for such treatments. So I wanted to just back up a little bit. I know IVF, even among Catholics, is often a misunderstood procedure. A lot of us, we know the pain of infertile couples, and that is a very real thing. But I think it's important to also understand the IVF industry and the assisted reproductive technologies industry, even more broadly speaking, of which IVF is the lion's share, as a $5.67 billion industry last year in the United States alone, that really exploits that heartbreak and that real pain that couples struggling to conceive feel. And so, I think that to give the sympathetic view to it and to say, okay, this is what they're trying to do. People want to have babies. we are facing a demographic winter decline, drop off catastrophe that really is of global and historic proportions. And so the surface level thinking would be like, oh, here's a technology that helps people make more babies. This could solve all these problems. Heartache, demographic winter. Sounds great, right? The problem is, of course, let's talk about IVF first. And I just want to set the stage with the facts and then let you guys kind of go in at it. IVF is a technology where you procure semen from the male in a disgusting way that we won't talk about because it's inappropriate. And then you take eggs from the woman in a very invasive procedure, and you create human beings in a petri dish. Literally, you like try and get them all together. And in one round of IVF, you might create 3, 10, 15 human embryos. You then implant those in the mother or the surrogate mother, in the biological mother who's going to carry them. You might implant 3, 4, 5 embryos if they've passed muster with all the DNA and genetic testing that you do on them before implanting them. And a couple of them take, maybe end up with twins, or you do what they call a reduction, where you actually abort the children, the extra embryos, if you don't want to have quadruplets, quintuplets, etc. So this is the actual sort of like plumbing of IVF. Sorry, Josh, I did use that verb.
Yeah,
This is how it works. And so we end up too in a situation where discarded embryos are either frozen in stasis. We have estimates are between 3 and 8 million frozen embryos in the United States every year, and we're producing a million more every year. And they sit there, either going to be destroyed and thawed in a few years or just in limbo. So it's a very strange technology. It's sort of in its designed to produce more death than it creates life, quote unquote. And so this is super problematic. And there was major pushback from a huge part of Trump's supporters this week about this. So I just wanted to open it up to you. Why do you think, where did the impetus for this executive order come from? Who's behind it? And is there an opportunity here to say, like, hold on, wait a minute, Maha, what's happening?
Well, it's interesting. This all stemmed from a case in Alabama where, because this industry is so unregulated, and I'm not a massive supporter of regulations, by the way, but like anything involving this, you want to make sure that couples have, hey, what's going on? Like, how did I end up with the wrong, thing? There's just a case in Georgia this week about this. And so these couples were suing the industry because they wanted, hey, if you promise this, I expect that. And so as that was going through the courts, I do love Trump. I love Trump a lot. But in general, Republicans in the United States Senate were like absolutely freaked out because, like, oh gosh, this is going to make it to the Supreme Court and we're going to revisit all these other cases and all this stuff. And so they're like, panic set in. They hit the panic button, and then Trump comes out and goes, I'm pro-life. I want more babies. I'm for this. And I get it. I just wish we would focus our energies on actually trying to deal with like the technology. There's a lot of technology. A lot of people have done a lot of work on the science end of things. They're trying to provide healing for women so they can understand here's fertility treatments that can be helpful because, getting at the root problem, in other words, I obviously fully support that. And I wish the energies were expended that way. This executive order is not actually in a ton of details on it. It's basically, I kind of like IVF. I'm instructing my staff to kind of do something to make it more affordable.
Find ways to cut costs, right? It's very vague.
It's not like some of these executive orders are very detailed. This one was just sort of principles sort of set in motion or whatever. And obviously, if we Catholic vote, we're against IVF. To the extent, so we're not going to like whatever it is. My point is, can it be mediocre, or is it going to be very, very, very bad? I don't know. We'll see. I mean, what we'd like to try to do, if it's one thing, if they're going to get rid of, let's say, nonsensical regulations that lower the costs, whatever. I'm not a fan, but I certainly prefer if it were only that as opposed to trying to ensnare taxpayers into support that stuff. Because I'd rather, if we're going to have taxpayer support helping people get pregnant, I would want it to be these fertility treatments that I think are so much better anyway, and they're less morally problematic. So again, part of this is there's a lot to be seen yet. But Trump is the man. Hey, I promise this is the campaign, so this is what I'm going to do.
Promises made, promises kept. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I get
yep.
that end of it. But there's still a lot to be done on this. So the executive order, like I said, is not very detailed from A to Z. And so we're already reaching out to the Trump administration and the staff and saying, hey, we want to try to channel this energy towards more productive things.
And Josh and Eric, I think this is very important. That thankfully, thanks to the hopefully the Holy Spirit's action, but then also because of just the wisdom of Donald Trump, he has surrounded himself with a lot of wonderful people, many of whom do share our Catholic faith. And it's not just J.D. Vance that's the most significant, but there's a lot of folks around him. So I'm hopeful and confident that they can point him in the right direction here, because I do think that this mistake, and I think it's a mistake, it flows from good intentions, right? Of saying, of course, we want to help couples have babies, and we just want more babies, period, in the United States. Very, very laudable goals, right? Of course, but not using the right methods. And I think, also, I'm so glad that you pointed out, Josh, about the economics of it, because look, our primary concern here, of course, is the morality of it and the ethics of it. But in addition, IVF is incredibly expensive. And so just from an economics perspective, it seems that there are far more efficient ways to treat the underlying infertility rather than sort of lab created babies, which cost a ton in addition to all the moral problems.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And we had some bishops react. Of course, I did want to highlight Bishop Burbidge out of Arlington. He wrote, great, we should put it up in the chat, Simon, if you're able to do that. But he said, I ask all people of faith and goodwill to pray for those married couples experiencing infertility, for the efficacy of life-affirming fertility care, for an openness to God's love and an ever deeper experience of the virtues, and for the grace to accept whatever God's will may be. And then this is the important part. The threats posed by IVF to human dignity and human rights are sometimes very obvious, and at other times quite subtle, but nevertheless knowable to all, and particular concern to those of faith. I ask all people of goodwill to engage in greater, thoughtful, and rational reflection on the costs associated with the IVF industry, which are evident by human reason. And I do think I would agree, the hope is that RFK now, with his, Make America Healthy Again and his taking over as Secretary of Health and Human Services, he has signaled that he's willing to have these conversations. Whereas in the previous administration, there was no conversation to be had, right? But at least we now have that hope of we can help them to think through the implications of IVF, and really, more importantly, of our fertility crisis. I mean, I was doing research on this. 1 in 5 American women are clinically not infertile, but struggling with fertility. 1 in 6 couples are clinically infertile. That means they're a married couple who has been trying actively to conceive naturally for more than 12 months. So it's 1 in 6. That's astonishing.
It does seem higher than it was before. And I wonder if it's like what Bobby Kennedy's getting at, the kind of food we eat, and that kind of stuff,
100%.
plastics and microwaving things. Does that have an effect? We'll see, it'd be worth looking into.
Right. And the emphasis on IVF and jumping to IVF in these artificial technologies to actually mask those underlying issues has undoubtedly dragged resources away from research into those underlying root causes. It is kind of a zero-sum game when it comes to funding in some ways if you're not going to print all the money. So we'd rather direct it to those kind of possibilities.
But just real quick to let people know, I mean, this is one of the things, I had some people who were kind of, anti-Trumpy or whatever. And something like this comes along and this is their chance to I guess, dunk on me. And some people did on CV online.
Might have happened.
It's just kind of silly. And it's oh, well, what about your boy now? What do you think about this? And I'm like, look, when he announced this before the election, we said, yeah, no, dude, we don't like this. We're not for this. We like you and we're going to help you get elected. But on this proposal, you have to understand, we were upfront with privately and then publicly that we're not going to support this and we're going to do our best to stop it because we have to. And I hope you understand, appreciate that, because that's the way it's going to be. And they're like, we get it. But so then these people, well, this is your guy. I'm like, we told him publicly and privately, we're going to try to do our best to stop this. And because we worked alongside with him to get elected, I think we actually have that voice at the table to try to talk to them and say, I know what you're saying here, but what about this? Might be another option that might be better. So we're going to do our best. So pray for, this effort. Pray that, again, in the design of things, hopefully that we can tie some things up in knots in one ways and open up doors in other ways and end up with a better solution overall.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to turn to another bishop's sort of event going on. And Josh, I'm going to open this up. We had some people write in and ask questions about the USCCB has brought some kind of lawsuit, some legal action against the Trump administration to try and stop, like freeze on funding when it comes to, I think the terminology they're using for this is refugee program. So I'm going to let you talk about this, Josh. I know you've dug into it. And then tell us what's going on with this lawsuit.
So obviously, part of this is the USAID stuff, and there's funding for all these different things, including helping of migrants. And so the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are the ones that are the recipients of this aid that it goes to help the migrants. And so the Trump administration's like, yeah, we're done with this. We're turning the faucet off here. We're turning off the spigot. And the bishops went to the courts and say, we want to freeze this. We want an emergency order by the courts to stop the Trump administration from being able to cut off the funds. We want the funds to continue flowing, and we can argue in court who's right and who's wrong. But while we're fighting this in the courts, keep the money going. And actually, surprisingly enough, the court said, no, we're not going to actually side with you on this one. We don't see some sort of irreparable immediate harm that is, that's forever damaging. And I actually kind of agree with this. Like, first of all, I prefer the money to be turned off anyway. I think all this money and aid to help, I'm not against helping people, but I do worry that we've created this magnet with the open border. Now, thankfully, it's closed. And then the helping of migrants, I do think it should be shut off. But here's the interesting thing. Like, if you're making the case, and that's what this is a common tactic. Hey, we're going to have irreparable harm. You need to keep this thing moving. You got to keep it flowing. Otherwise, we're going to be harmed. But is it really that? Is that really the case? Because we're not just talking about some random, let's say, charity. Okay, we're talking about the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And if this truly is something that is really, really important, boy, the U.S. bishops have the ability to, I don't know, connect with 50 million Americans every Sunday. They could turn to their flocks and say, we really need you to step up and pay for this, right? This, and in fact, actually, this became kind of this discussion online where one of the journalists, her name is Bree Dale, was like, I don't know. Do you think this lawsuit, she asked her followers, do you think this lawsuit by the bishops will affect your decision whether or not to continue tithing? And I think it's an important discussion to at least talk about. Now, I know social media isn't necessarily the best place for arguments because you can get kind of a food fight. But what I did not actually appreciate was one priest, Father Matthew Schneider, who gets on there and says, this tweet is scandalous. Let me tell you, Father.
You're not allowed to ask the question? What?
You're not helping. Okay? If we conservative-leaning Catholics are just crazy and don't see the forest for the trees, we don't really understand that this funding is important and should happen, you know what you can do? Stop scolding us.
Yeah.
Use this as an opportunity to say, I can understand there's a lot of stuff going on in the media and politicians saying this or that, but here's why this is important. Win us over. Because if you're right, then I will open up my wallet and I will give you the money if you can show me this is why it's needed. But that's not what this priest was doing. And other priests I do respect that are saying that they're basically reverting back to this old model where
pray, pay, and obey. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Which even Pope Francis was saying, no, we can't be so ecclesiastical. You have to actually get out there and you have to make the case.
You know, Josh, I'll give you an example, too, which I hope is powerful and persuasive of really faithful Catholics who completely disagree with these Catholic bishops. And those are the folks who live on the U.S.-Mexico border. And the reason I know that is I was just there filming a documentary. I went to Starr County, Texas, which is near McAllen, Texas. It is the most Hispanic county in America, 97% Latino. It's all Mexican Americans, basically, on our side of the border. It had not voted Republican in 100 years. Donald Trump just won Starr County this last November. He won it by 16%. 2 cycles previous to in 2016, he lost it to Hillary Clinton by 60%. 2 cycles later, he wins it by 16, the most Hispanic county in America. To connect that back to this issue, I talked to lots of regular folks. The documentary, by the way, is being edited now. Hopefully, will be out next week. I think it's going to be really powerful about what moved these people. What moved it? It's a gritty, working class place, and it's also a place of people of deep faith. I really found that in my interviews of just regular folks, cops and ranchers, single moms. It was probably, and I've done a lot of these documentaries all over America with my political travels. Have been all over the country talking to regular folks. I'd say it was probably the most deeply Christian and religious part of the country that I've been in, is Starr County, Texas. Just deep faith, both Catholic as well as Hispanic evangelicals, but entirely Christian. And it was impressive to me how even when we were talking about topics that weren't necessarily per se religious, or related to faith, how much people would still bring up their faith in this process. And one of the things that a lot of the folks here, not one or two people, a lot of the folks there told me, the Catholics, the deeply devoted Catholics in Starr County, is they would say to me, I can't believe what the church is doing here at the border in our name. I can't believe the way that they are incentivizing, right, this mass trespassing into literally our town, over our yards, to the point that we're scared at night. We have relatives in Border Patrol. Almost everyone there has a friend or relative in Border Patrol, who we're deeply worried about, right, because of this incredibly dangerous situation that was created by Joe Biden. So it's fascinating, and I would offer that up as an argument on the other side. A lot of really faithful lay Catholics who are dealing with this issue in the most acute way possible. They love their Catholic faith, but they sure don't like some of these actions that are being done in the name of their faith, unfortunately.
Well, and because you get so many unintended consequences, you can have really good bishops who have a heart of gold, and they just don't know practical on the ground. Some of the stuff isn't working out the way you think it is.
Right.
And it's right, as you mentioned, Stark County, it's right there on their doorstep, which is why you saw that county flip from blue to red. And they brought it, the one former Republican on The View, she said, hey, this is, watch out. The changes that are going on here, this should be worrisome. And was it Sunny Houston, however say her name? She's like,
they laughed her
oh,
off
it's because they're misogynist.
Yeah.
These Hispanics are misogynist. Isn't that great? And I'm thinking to myself, really? They're misogynist. That's the reason they didn't vote for Kamala Harris. They're misogynist.
Right.
8 years ago, they voted for Hillary.
Right.
So are they really misogynist? Or maybe you changed. The whole Democratic Party changed. I don't know. Maybe. Call me crazy.
Maybe. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Democrat land here. I would love to pull this up. So let's start with, can we pull up that the Kyle and the Becker status there? We're looking, the Democrats are regrouping. They're considering what mistakes were made, maybe, and they're thinking about 2028. How do we get this back? So the most recent polling shows, oh no, not this again. Kamala Harris, 37%. So of the primary candidates at the moment, we've got Harris at 37%, and then we've got Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, Josh's buddy. Were you on a flight together? You were like on a flight together the other day.
This is
crazy.
You're
like pals.
I've only flown twice this month, and both times he's on my plane.
Both times? What?
Steve, he's not Mayor Pete from South Bend anymore. He and his boyfriend, husband, they like to say it. He moved up to Traverse City, Michigan, up in my neck of the woods. And so twice this month, there he is on a flight. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to say anything, whatever. I don't want to be that guy at the airport getting the, come on.
Right.
All right, that means we're all supposed to pray for him. But Buttigieg is at a distant 11%. Newsom coming up at 9%. And so I think Pete is trying to figure out, how can I market myself a little better? Yeah. Obviously, I'm coming up. I was in the Biden cabinet. I was one of the guys covering up for him. Never mentioned that I hadn't had a meeting with my boss for 14 months or something at the end there. And so he goes on, here, pull up the Chris Rufo. We just got to listen to this. This is Mayor Pete having a moment of self-reflection here.
caricature. A little bit of that event you described, and it was a caricature of everything that's wrong with our ability both to cohere as a party and to reach to those who don't always agree with us. And we cannot go on like that. We cannot. I also think that we believe in the values that we care about for a reason. And this is not about abandoning those values. It's about making sure we're in touch with the first principles that animate them. What do we mean when we talk about diversity? Is it caring for people's different experiences and making sure no one's mistreated because of them, which I will always fight for? Or is it making people sit through a training that looks like something out of Portlandia, which I have also experienced, and it is how Trump Republicans are made, if that comes to your workplace with the best of intentions, but doesn't actually get at what actually matters here, what's actually at stake. I think, and this might sound counterintuitive, if we were more serious about the actual values and not caught up in vocabularies and trying to cater to everybody only in terms of their particular slice of combinations of identities versus the shared project, actually, if we thought about it a little bit differently, things like diversity would be actually an example of how we reach out beyond our traditional coalition. And what I mean by that is the opposite of diversity is uniformity. And if there's one thing I really respect about principled conservatives, even if I don't always agree with them, it's that they have a horror of anything that has a whiff of being pressed into conformity by government or by society. So I would like to appeal to people who, whether it's because of a conservative or libertarian instinct or a more progressive instinct, or I would say just an American belief that part of the point of living in a country like this is you don't have to conform to what other people demand of you. That we're only on board with that.
I can't take anymore. Stop.
It's just so funny. I mean,
Steve.
10 minutes ago, he deletes his pronouns in his bio, and suddenly he's like, this is crazy. Dude, you were Mayor Pete in South Bend. You forced these cops to go through all this DEI bullcrap stuff. You promoted this. It's not like, yeah, I guess we kind of made a mistake. You made the mistake, brother.
Yeah.
Right. Steve, you've been on the ground floor of campaigns. Is this a man preparing to run for president? Like, what is this?
Quite obviously, yes. And listen, I will say this: he has no principles, but he has some skills. All right, I will give him that. Yes. I mean, he's obviously a sharp guy. I think he was a Rhodes Scholar. He has a way with words. When he wants to, he can sound reasonable and moderate. Right. Now, again, judging him by his actions, we know none of that is reality. Right? It's not who he actually is, but he's certainly willing. He's dishonest enough and skilled enough to present that at times in an effective way. So, look, I'm not saying we should be scared of Mayor Pete, but I am saying don't dismiss him. He's clearly running. He clearly will have a constituency in the upcoming election. And I think, when I say he's running, I mean, he's going to be running for the next 3+ years until he officially announces. And looking at that poll, and I'm glad you showed it, Erica. Of course, a poll right now is very different than an actual primary, right? Where you have to do the kind of retail work of campaigning in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, assuming that the Democrats actually allow New Hampshire to take its rightful place early in the process again.
Well, they went through Iowa, right? Because Iowa's too white. So they're
right. They're both too white for them.
Yeah, right.
For their identity politics, fixation.
South Carolina.
When we saw Kamala actually go through the primary process, which of course there was no primary process this last time. She was anointed rather than elected. But when she did go through the primary process previously, she didn't even make it to the first votes in the Iowa caucus.
Right.
She had
didn't
no
even make it to Iowa.
Zero polling, no money, and I believe why. A couple of things. Number one, she's just an incredibly unlikable candidate, not very sharp, unlike Mayor Pete. Not very sharp, not very good on the stump. And the other thing, and this is really, really important, and most people are too politically correct to talk about this, but the Democratic primary, you mentioned that they don't like, the Democrat leadership doesn't like Iowa and New Hampshire because those states are so white. A lot of the Democratic primary is very much influenced by the black vote. It's critical. And what we saw when she ran, at least the first time for president, is blacks didn't embrace her. They just didn't. They actually much preferred Joe Biden, right? Irish Joe Biden was a much better candidate for the black vote than was Kamala Harris. Which is fascinating. Now, has she changed that, because she ran last November and because she was anointed as the nominee? It's possible. It's possible that the black community thinks differently of her, but I tend to doubt it. And even though I would love to have her as our opponent because I think she will be so beatable.
I know, please.
I don't think she will be.
Well, the thing about, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in 2020, before COVID actually started, because this was at the beginning of the primary, so COVID wasn't the thing that it was, if you'll remember. Mm-hmm. And Bernie Sanders was the neighbor of New Hampshire, so he trounces, does so good in New Hampshire. And I thought Pelosi was the one that hit the panic button and said, hey, Clyburn, black Democrat from South Carolina, we need to stop Bernie Sanders, if he's the nominee, we're going to lose the House, we're going to lose the Senate, we're going to lose everything. We're going to get trounced. And so panic button. Clyburn goes down there to South Carolina, which is a lot of blacks. The blacks make up like I think 1 out of every 3 voters in the South Democratic primary. It might even be more, might be closer to majority. And he said, Obama trusted Joe. He's our guy. Yeah. And it made all the difference. I mean, Biden was in 5th place in New Hampshire primary. He got like 7%, and he turns around, he wins South Carolina, and that's why. And so, but now when you start thinking about, you're right, as you start thinking about 2028, things do change over time, but overall, blacks are not like the most enthusiastic pro-gay candidates. And so that's, whether you think that's fair or not, that's going to be something that Buttigieg is going to have to address if he, I don't know how to address it, but deal with it. And it may not be talked about, or who knows, but we'll see if that has an impact as well.
Yeah, it'll be crazy. All right, we are in the Twilight Zone already. So I'm gonna, Josh, I know we used yours already, but I'll pitch it to you. You got another one in there?
Well, I was kind of hoping then you'd go first. I do have backups, but
hey, I can go first. Mine is just like goofy and probably unfair, but I'm gonna go with Riley Gaines, her moment on Piers Morgan. This is the logic of the trans ideology, and Riley Gaines has become a master at pulling the most ridiculous statements out of people. So Simon, if you could get that up, we just got to roll the tape here. So we've got Riley Gaines, Piers Morgan, and this is Blossom, a man who thinks he's a woman, and they're talking about the upcoming Olympics.
Absurd from top to bottom, saying there should be a gender-neutral Olympics.
I know.
Are you serious?
Madness.
Do you also believe, Blossom, that we should combine the Paralympics and the Olympics? I would love to hear an answer to that.
Okay, I'll ask her. Bring back Blossom. Blossom, should we combine the Paralympics with the regular Olympics? Have them all compete with each other?
I mean, why not? And to go back to Riley's point,
why not? You are completely insane.
I mean, Riley's reaction reminds me of myself. She totally pulled Nerica there. She's just like, what? But she did it. I mean, she made the connection, and Blossom walks right into it. Poor Blossom.
Walked into the trap. I love it.
Walked right in. Yes, we should combine the Paralympics and the Olympic athletes. I'm just like, oh, you sealed your fate there. But this is the extreme logic of the trans movement. It ends up erasing women. It erases the disabled. And this is why we fight tooth and nail against it. And I mean, people see this, right? This is the polling. The Americans this is an 80-20 issue because it is that ridiculous. And Riley totally exposed it in that moment there. So I had to play that clip. Let's go.
Okay, I got mine now. I just sent you the message here.
Let's do it.
So another palate cleanser. Sports fans, major change. The New York Yankees are going to allow you to grow a beard now. That for decades, players with beards, they wanted to sign with the Yankees, they'd have to shave it. Johnny Damon, whatever. You could have a mustache, but that's it. And they have decided to update their policy, of course. As a bearded American,
throw your hat in the wing.
What do you think, Steve? Should I try out 48 left hand?
I think George Steinbrenner is rolling over in his grave at this change. This would have never happened with the boss still in charge, but God rest his soul. And I guess the Yankees had decided that they're gonna bow down to the culture. That's what I would say, right?
Oh, come on, Steve. You gotta push back. I gotta push back at this now. Here's the funny thing. Every once in a while, you see these things on the internet are like totally causation does not mean correlation. And they take two things that are absolutely not related at all. But I can't help but notice, if you think about right after the United States Civil War is over and millions of blacks are now free, the promise of the Declaration of Independence is for 100% of our citizens now. The economic engine of America is unleashed. Talk about a height of freedom, right? Mm-hmm. The late 1880s. Mm-hmm. And what happened? Steve, I'm telling you this, 95% of American men had facial hair.
Right.
So we're talking maximum height of personal freedom, maximum amount of men with facial hair. Now, come on, Steve. Now, what happened in the decades after that? Freedom
Steve, are you
goes
feeling the
down.
pressure?
Men started shaving their faces. We get the progressive era, income tax, direct election senators. Bad news. We've been fighting it all the 20th century. What's been happening? We're fighting back, Steve. Now, you got a great face. You maybe don't want to cover it with facial hair. This guy, I'm covering it up. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
No, I love it. And by the way, speaking of sports, just another feel-good story. Even though the American team did not prevail in overtime against the Canadians, I thought it was so incredibly refreshing. And I'm a nuts sports fan, but let's face it, professional sports, I think, has gotten increasingly polluted with a lot of selfishness, a lot of divas, just a total fixation on money alone, rather than camaraderie and teamwork and pride. The exact opposite, though, from this American team, right? And the Canadian side as well, certainly. But I'm an American. I care about our boys. And the way that they played in what was essentially an exhibition tournament, right?
It was a gimmick. It was great.
It doesn't really matter to their careers. And they took it so seriously. They played so hard for each other, for our country, for the United States, and nearly toppled the hockey empire, which is Canada, and I think will topple them eventually. The United States is getting better at hockey, I think, en masse than the. And so I know it's not a specifically Catholic topic, but it was just
that's very perfect,
very refreshing, and just as an American, something that I think made a lot of us proud. Even if you're not a hockey fan, I think a lot of people got tuned into this tournament and saw how these guys played, and it's in many ways a throwback to how a lot of professional sports used to be and still should be.
I got to give credit. I'm with you. I want to give credit to the National Hockey League because this is whoever does their marketing is a genius. This 4 nations playoff to whatever country, stroke of total genius. And it plays off of the one that they had about 10 years ago, and they still do, where they have like an exhibition hockey game. Like they had it at the big house in Ann Arbor where they play football. Like, let's put the hockey rink here and play. Genius ideas. They're always like the forgotten about sport, and as soccer blew up, but they're nimble and they come up with really good ideas. So that this 4 nations thing was great. Are we getting the video here now?
Yep. I stayed up way too late last night to watch it. But.
It's a great sport. My kids love watching it, and it's very physical. And next year, when Canada is the 51st state, of course, it'll just be 3 nations. we will be the greatest again. Thank you, Donald Trump.
Could you imagine how great the combined team would be?
I know, right? Unstoppable.
The Russians would never have a chance. Right?
That's right.
It would be great. North America wins. Steve, do you have anything else to share for Twilight Zone kind of type stuff? Or
I think
that was mine.
That covered it. Okay, great. Then I'm going to say we just want to end with the JD Vance at CPAC because this was a beautiful moment and a good reminder, I think, for everyone about what it means to be a Christian patriot. So, Simon, if we could just roll this tape and then I'll go into prayer.
First is, I believe, like the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith, it's not just a set of good moral principles, though it is that. I think the fundamental tenet of our faith is that the Son of God became man, he died, and then he raised himself from the dead. That is the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith, and I think so much flows from that. And I think one lesson that flows from that is that we shouldn't fear death. Of course, death is a very bad thing, but there are much more terrible things than just losing one's life, and importantly, you could lose one's soul. And I think whether it's fighting for the unborn or fighting for peace and security for our citizens, I want us to be the kind of society where my kids can grow up to be virtuous young people, can be good young Christians, of course, because that's what I'm trying to raise them to be, and that's what our public policy is trying to do. Creating the space where moms and dads can raise their children in their faith to become good young people who believe the things that I do. That is what I'm trying to create, is the space for you, of course, to raise your children as you see fit, but the space for me to raise my kids to be the kind of young people that I think they ought to be. And the other thing that I take from it, Mercedes, is if you look at the long history of the Christian faith, we've been around for about 2,000 years now, give or take a few years, and there have been really dark times in the history of the Christian faith. There have been really good times in the history of the Christian faith. And I just try to remind myself that we put our faith in God above, we put our faith in the grace of God, and we try the best to do His will, and we don't worry so much about whether we're going to have earthly rewards. We worry about whether we're doing right by God Almighty above. That's what I try to do, and that's how I try to run my life in public.
Thank you, Simon. It's beautiful. And yeah, Steve, thank you for everything that you did to help get that message, that man, to the global stage now. So looking forward to working with you for many years to come at Catholic Vote here. And it was great to get to know you a little bit today. I hope that you and your family are blessed over this weekend. Josh, have a great weekend. Everyone in the chat, have a great weekend. But please don't forget to pray for us. Our Lady of Guadalupe, St. Thomas More, St. Fidelis, pray for us. And we will see you all